Let me preface all of this first by saying I am no longer a paranormal investigator. Though my interest in the paranormal has not dulled at all, I can no longer prowl dark alleyways and abandoned buildings to verify the existence of ghosts and keep my sanity in check. Most people think it's easy enough to go into a haunted place and you'll get hit by spirits throwing things at you. I wish this were the case, because if it were, we'd be rich. Not all of our investigations bore fruit. More often than not, we ended up spending long hours fiddling about in the dark to no activity. You know how it is. The illusion of something scary is usually enough to send active imaginations into overdrive. And from there, stories spread by word of mouth tend to take a life of their own. Many end up being more real than actual haunts themselves. That's not to say I haven't seen some shit, because I have. My most interesting moments were a result of my investigations, and for someone that freaks out at horror movies, I did the work with impressive calm, driven purely by adrenaline and my innate desire to know more. But before I begin to relate some of those stories, I think it is important to start from the beginning. After all, this interest had to originate from somewhere, and when it comes to ghosts, it's usually pretty traumatic. So I apologize for the time being you're not going to hear any of my first-hand experience investigating haunted places. Instead, you'll hear about the supernatural stuff that happened to me that eventually sent me down this dark road. So this is my origin story, so to speak. This was my catalyst. I'm from Southeast Asia. Born and bred in Asia, we like to think that our ghosts are scarier than the common ones in the West. I can't vouch for that, but I'll let you decide on your own if this is true. Much of my youth was quite a blur, and I don't have the best memory, but a sequence of events that occurred when I was around 6 still burns vividly. When I was very young, my parents moved apartments to live in the eastern side of the country. It was exciting. The apartment was bigger, and we didn't have filthy neighbors whose children would casually walk up to our doorstep just to throw up their lunches for no reason other than they were ill-bred and in dire need of a thorough whacking. Compared to the old one, this new place was brighter. The sea was in the far distance and civilization in the late 80s, and the new era was far more vibrant and modern. But despite this, there was a deep feeling of unease that grew day by day. It started with nightmares that ended up me waking up in a cold sweat. I never received such haunting dreams when I lived in the old place. I wanted to seek safety with my parents, but they being rather strict, I thought at that age it was wiser to deal with my own bad dreams than have my mother yell at me again. So I tried. Every night to sleep without fail, I would wake up from a nightmare, panting, and seeing strange shadows move on my wall. My room was next to the common corridor that everyone on the floor of the block would use when returning or leaving home. So it wasn't uncommon to hear people walking up and down, even during the wee hours of the day. But it was uncommon to have someone scratch at your old zinc windows and hear it being pried open from the outside. This too, I heard. I didn't tell my parents, simply because I was afraid they would call me a liar. My mom was a hard disciplinarian, and being Asian, I am not Oriental by the way, the cane is an ever-present fixture in the house. I had been on its end many times, and not even for the slightest thing would I risk having my mom beat the shit out of me again. So I kept it to myself and resorted to sleeping under the altar. We're Catholics, where in the darkness of the entire apartment was the only place that remained lit. This meant I was effectively out in the living room, between my parents' bedroom, with the door closed, and mine. Somehow this felt safer than in my room. But it kept my nightmares at bay. Unfortunately, they would return with more ferocity whenever I thought it was alright to go back to my bed. And while the nightmares would change, the one thing that kept appearing was this man. Okay, so he was like a man in the sense that he was male and had the features of a man, but his face was I don't know how to explain it. It was just wrong. His mouth was too wide, his eyes a little too slant, and his grin. I will never forget that grin. It was predatory, but demonic. It was real to me, and I hated the dark and going to sleep, but I couldn't convince myself that it wasn't real. At that age, I already knew that I had a very vivid imagination, so it wasn't out of the ordinary for my mind to manifest such things after I've watched a creepy movie or TV show. Anyway, my parents did let me sleep with them for a few nights, but it was because my bed broke. Happenstance worked in my favor, and for the first few nights, I slept soundly, more soundly than I ever had since we moved in. But on the 5th night, something terrible happened. Something that until this day, I still remember and feel its effects. I slept between my parents. My dad is a heavy sleeper, and so was I. There was a joke in my family that even an earthquake would not wake us. We actually proved this theory, and even though it was merely aftershocks of an earthquake from the neighboring country across the sea, it still counts. Anyway, there I was, fast asleep, my entire body coming up to maybe half of my mom's, and she was a small woman. The bed was a king-size bed, so it was pretty huge. So I imagine my surprise when I woke up suddenly, feeling a hand on my right ankle, and my entire body very slowly being pulled off the bed. At first I thought I was dreaming, but then the truly frightening thing happened. My entire body was yanked urgently off the bed. I clawed for my mother, but it wasn't until more than half of my body was off the bed, leaving only my shoulders and head still on it, that my mom woke up with a start, grabbed me by my hands, pulled me to her, and held me for the entire night. I was wide-eyed, terrified, but I didn't cry. I don't normally cry anyway, but this time it was mostly out of shock. I was trying to figure out what happened, but nothing made sense. I finally fell asleep and, well, you guys are aware of the kind of dream you have where you're not aware that you're dreaming? Well, in this dreamscape, which felt real, it was already morning, and I had woken from sleep. I was on my parents' bed. Behind the bed was a window, and beyond that were blocks and blocks of apartment buildings. I knelt up against the window and looked down, and there, climbing up the wall, was that man from the dream. He looked up at me and grinned, a grin that stretched from ear to ear and filled with razor-sharp teeth. At that moment, I woke up for real, and while the shock of dreaming that vividly of the creature climbing up the side of the wall to my 14th-story apartment was slowly passing, it was replaced by a bone-crunching pain on my right ankle. Till this day, the ankle hurts. It comes and it goes, and it is why I always have slept with my feet covered. Not the most exciting of origin stories, but it did propel me further into the supernatural. But before I even joined up, I learned that before I was born, my mother was a victim of black magic. Go figure, right? Today's No Sleep story is from username CACX. New videos every week. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. And sweet dreams.